Welcome, John Weaver. You showed off your really electrifying shirt before. Here we go. Electrify everything. John is known in the industry as the commercial solar guy. And I also know that you have written over 1,000 articles for PV Magazine, the US edition of it. Thank you for joining me for this interview to benefit SciSci students who are so eager to learn more about systems analysis. Could you tell us more about your day job, please?
Sure. Hi. First, thanks for having me here, Anna. It's cool to be talking with smart people who are thinking about clean energy at the beginning of their career, because that's necessary. So that's great, and thank you for teaching these people this. So that's cool as well. So thank you, and for driving a Tesla. So putting your money where your mouth is. So all those things are nice. So thank you, Anna. 9 to 5, we are a commercial solar guy, is a solar developer, a contractor, we build projects, and a consultant. um, we focus on projects for small businesses through small utility scale, so 10 to 40 acres worth of land. Most of our projects, though, are on top of large buildings or what we would call behind the meter. So they're plugged right into some business's electrical gear, and it's powering their company. And we've been around I've been in solar for about 15 years. Commercial solar guy's been around since 2015. 5 full-time employees, 3, 4, 5 contractors who work fully with us, plus installation crews, and mostly in the Northeast of the United States, but consulting nationwide.
I think it's fair to say that you were doing solar before it was cool. You shared with me in the preparation call that you are using LCOE as a metric in your financial analyses. So I was wondering if you could comment further on the usefulness of this metric compared to, say, other financial metrics.
Um, it's funny. The LCOE calculation is in that spreadsheet that I shared with you, not because we actually use it. It's there because we had a specific customer ask because he wanted to compare this value versus what he was going to pay. And he wanted to see if this solar project was gonna save him money versus something else. So our CPA, he who helps build our financial models so that they're more accurate, he added in that field. In fact, LCOE, LCOS, from our perspective as a developer who isn't, we're a young company who's smaller, so I wouldn't say we're not a cutting edge company in terms of aggressive finance, large projects, competing against the biggest in the world. As a writer for PV Magazine, I write about those companies. But as a developer and as a contractor, 9 to 5, we use LCOE and LCOS as more of a broader philosophical thing. We have now learned from analysts, economists like you folks, advanced companies who are really cutting edge, that hypothetically solar is cheap and wind is cheap. And this is why we know we have these rough costs, we have these estimates and these LCOE and LCOS scores. And then later we see companies putting out projects that align at those prices. So for us, as somebody further down the food chain, LCOE and LCOS is guidance. It's saying, hey, these projects hypothetically could meet the financial requirements of investors. And so we say, cool, this is where we should aim. And then we get to work and we find projects and we find land and we figure out our cost and our hardware and our labor, our incentives, our tax credits, O&M cost, everything. And at the end of that, we're given a number called return on investment. That's what matters to us, 9 to 5. A payback period. That's what matters. Arguably, you could say LCOE and LCOS are within that same family of equations because they probably say the same thing if you're really good at math, but they're different values. LCOE and LCOS is what is possible. Return on investment is what is projected for this particular project in this particular place, this particular day. It's a useful term to guide us, but when it comes to 9 to 5, it's, we have to move on from that number and we look at what investors care about or potential owners. And they want to know how fast it's going to pay back. They want to know what the return on investment is or the internal rate of return. Those are the numbers that we see in our spreadsheet and solve for. The LCOE, LCOS number is there and it looks cool and it's neat to go over there and look at it, but it's not the equation driver when we're doing a sale today with a buyer. They're looking at ROI.
That's understandable. So you've talked a little bit about practical limitations of LCOE and what might make sense for more like systems planning on the macro level for a policymaker. Like every time a Lazard report is published, there is a big splash in the media. And I know that you've published on these numbers, commented on these numbers. I will link your article for students to read about LCOE and LCOS cost curves. You were mentioning about more practical considerations, such as payback period. I'm going to go a little bit off script here and would like to ask whether it would be comfortable sharing what are the payback periods for solar that an investor at the moment with all of the current subsidies is looking for.
Yeah, so when you're looking at the investors who are the bigger the project, the more money being invested, the more secure the project is, the lower the payback. And that's because the project's more secure, more money, more capital, more competition. And so these days, with interest rates being higher, and this number is coming down, right now, a large portfolio might earn with a good portfolio, well developed, good off takers, a good developing company, a good contractor who's going to build it, a positive portfolio. It's still hard work, still got some risks, but everybody looks at it and says, all right, we want this deal. The return on investment that somebody might be able to get if they competed is probably in the 8 to 9, 7.5 to 8.5% range. And it did just drop 50 basis points because the Federal Reserve and others around the world are lowering the general interest rates as inflation is coming down globally. A couple years ago, when the Fed had the interest rates at like 0%, 0.5%, projects you could get 5.5%, 6.5% on a big portfolio with a lot of projects, and people were being aggressive. Smaller projects, though, with smaller investment groups, they're going to start to require returns on investments that'll push toward 10%, might even go over 10%. Small projects that have high risks items, like a little item, can really affect the financial feasibility. Those might have a 12 to 14% because you got to be able to account for things that could knock the project offline really well, really strongly. So I would say nowadays, really big, really strong projects, 6%, 7%, maybe 8%, but it's trending downward. And small projects going to break into the low double-digit numbers for investor return on investments.
Yeah, that's very valuable how you explain the risk and return profile depending on how secure the project is and how predictable the cash flows. In your writing, you've mentioned such numbers recently, such as 12% is the usual cost of capital, 20% down payment you need to start developing the project, pretty much like buying a house, right? You also need 20%. And you assumed 8% interest rate. And then you need to finance the remaining 80%. How does this impact LCOE? Or these are all different concepts that in your world do not intersect much?
So when I wrote probably these values, 12%, 20%, 8%, these might all be values that were used by Lazard when they put together their profile so that they could have a nice, consistent, solid number. Um, the 20% down payment is a really important one. And a lot of asset managers look very aggressively at this number because they only have so much cash, so much capital. And they want to, I guess, a common term is turbocharge. They want to leverage their returns. So instead of putting down $1, they want to put down $20 or 20 cents. And that 20 cents, they want to figure out how to make the same amount of money as somebody else who puts down $1. And so they buy some money and they spend 8 to 12%. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of cost because solar and wind, these are projects that have a lot of cash out front. And I was doing a little bit of math before we jumped on here. And I did a $1 million project with a 10-year loan. An interest rate of 8% versus 12% is $275,000 in difference. That's 27.5% of the original money down. That's the type of money that can make or break a deal very easily and say, well, if this 275 doesn't exist anymore, that means the developer's not getting paid. And if the developer's not getting paid, they're not doing the work. Or the landowner's not getting paid, or the contractor, or anybody. That $275,000 makes projects happen or makes projects not. And, with that 20% down payment number and these interest rates, as interest rates start going up, that down payment number has to go up. Because if you have an interest rate on 100%, you're really going to just extract all of the value being created by the electricity sales, and it's all going to go to a bank. And so you have to put down some cash. But the bigger the interest rate is, the more you're motivated to put down more cash because that interest rate hurts. And so large utility scale developers who are buying and selling projects, who are using Wall Street capital, not seven-figure projects, not $1 million, not $10 million, but $100 and billion-dollar projects. These folks are using advanced financial engineering is the terminology, where they're just learning how to move cash around in different ways to minimize the cost and maximize their returns. And a 4% difference from a cost of capital and interest rate going from 8 to 12, that's a massive difference. And it's going to have an influence on the down payments. Nowadays, with tax credits being at 30, 40, and 50%, you'll often find down payments aligned with tax credits. So maybe that 20% number can move up safely because of the way tax credit dynamics. But it's still, the more interest you got to pay, the more you want to put down because that payment will really mess up your returns. And so, one goes higher, the other goes higher. One goes down, the other goes down. And, cash is challenging with renewables because you're, in essence, prepaying for multiple decades of energy. Whereas with oil and gas, with coal, all you got to do is build the power plant to burn it. And then you get to pour materials in there constantly over the decades. And you're paying for all that oil and gas and coal in advance. So the cash, being able to run cash well and manage cash in solar development and energy storage development is a very valuable trait to have.
We did specify with students that renewable energy projects are high CapEx, low OpEx, and fossil fuel projects another way around. So this really resonated. I was wondering how many battery projects are you installing right now? We know the batteries are coming, and there is a related concept to the levelized cost of storage that comes into play once you have projects with that are paired with batteries.
So we're young with batteries. We're probably on our third or fourth battery total that we've installed. I think of two of them off the top of my head that are completing right now. One in New York, one in Massachusetts. And it's cool to do them. They're enabling installations or installation sizes that weren't possible because of power grid limitations. So before, you could only have a solar system that could be size X because the grid can only let so much solar through. But now, if you put a big battery on the back of it, you can double and triple that solar project because the grid will only allow so much solar. But in the meantime, you can store it in that battery and then it'll come out later. So now we have a solar project in upstate New York that outputs electricity until midnight sometimes. And midnight is definitely not daytime. And that's all because of a battery. So, I as a writer, I like to say that the sun never goes down to be funny. But, technically the sun's always up somewhere on the earth, circling the planet. But, we have to be more practical. And nowadays, we can have a real battery, a real solar project on a large scale that could run your existence 24/7. And so we're edging toward that. Um, so batteries with us are a growing thing, but they're really expanding nationwide. Um, right now, we're in the midst, and our company's small and at the beginning of it. Right now, we're in the midst of what I've been saying. It's there's three things that are coming together. Technology is advancing, and there's a lot of different ways of seeing the technology that's advancing, but it is without a doubt. At the same time, the cost is coming down, and it's partially because these are three things that mix in together. It's partially because technology is advancing, but it's also because the scale of the industry is expanding, and they're simply getting better. They're automating, and then at the same time, we have costs coming down for scale. We have technology advancing, and at the exact same time, we have the industry as a whole, it's deploying volume. And the very act of deploying via learning curves leads to lower pricing. And there's all these different learning curve ideas. The most famous one is Moore's curve, or no, Moore's law. And
Yes.
Moore's law says that every 18 months, the number of transistors on a chip will double. And in the solar industry, I believe we have something called Swanson's law that says for every doubling of capacity deployed, the price of a solar panel will fall 20%. I don't know of any specific rules in the energy storage business, but I know that right now we're seeing massive scaling, massive factories, massive technology, and the price over the past year has probably fallen, maybe a year and a half, 55 to 75% for technology. So now it's happening right now. We're in the midst of it. We're in the midst of the battery revolution that is hooked onto the back of the solar revolution that already occurred. And now the two, we have a last question, or the fourth question you had, but the two are now feeding into each other. I have a quick, a simple slide, three quick slides to show. That
Yes,
will give,
absolutely. Go for it. Let's start
yeah,
screen sharing.
yeah, to give a very simple, just visual of these changes that are occurring right now. So this is the first slide, and this represents technology that's advancing. And the energy density, and this is just a curve starting way back in the 90s and coming up into these days. Jeff Dawn, you see this name over here. This gentleman works for Tesla. So you can see some of the best, most advanced companies on Earth in batteries are in this curve of growing density. That means getting more batteries into the same place. And then there's research like this. This is just a piece of research that came out a few months ago showing this curve of energy density going up. And energy density matters in a few ways. One of the ways is that you have, if you have a battery, your battery fits in your hand. But now you got to put all this stuff around the battery. You got to put a case, you got to put a box, you got to ship it, you got to connect it to stuff. And for every, like, say, 1 megawatt hour, you have to have one transformer because that's all that can fit. But now if you can fit the same amount of energy or 7 times as much, because if you look at this chart, in 1994-ish, we were at 100 watt hours per kilogram. Now we're over 700. So if you can fit 7 times as much energy in the same box, all this other hardware gets cheaper because all this other hardware was necessary. So if you have a ship that before it cost $1 million and it carried 10 people, but now it carries 70 people, obviously the cost per person is going to go down. So we're in that stage where this expanding energy density is massive. At the same time, we see the price coming down. And this year, we're in a price window where it's happening even faster than this purple chart over here, which showed 2024 going below $100 per kilowatt hour. We are the Chinese government has made it a national security and an economic thing. The Chinese government has said, in order to push our economy, we're going to use energy storage and new energy, solar energy storage, EVs, as economic pumps. So prior, people would lower interest rates or they would hire more government workers. In China's case, they're saying, let's build more solar power. Let's build more batteries. Let's grow our economy via these new energy things. That's leading to new capacity, which leads to new factories, which new technology, new advancement, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing this downward curve collapse. And it's all related to this volume being deployed. This is a cool curve. This is probably S curve. I guess everything's exponential, but this is a strong exponential that shows that we're probably going to double capacity in less than every 2.5, 3 years. And, if curves like this carry on indefinitely, they end up having a significant deployment effect. Things can't ever indefinitely carry on with growth rates like this. They slow down eventually. But in this place, this is the fun place where things change and where new global vast fortunes are being made. I mean, essentially, Elon Musk's fortune started with making he made his fortune before Tesla, but with Tesla, it went to the moon when he became worth, $100 billion plus because of batteries in a car. Some of the wealthiest people in China now are related to solar and energy storage. So it's happening right now. We're seeing massive change. We're seeing technology advancements. We're seeing longer lifetimes for the same hardware. Back in the day, a battery would last 5 years. Now you can get a warranty that lasts 25 years. So if you imagine your levelized cost of storage, it used to be $1 million, but you got to spread it over 5 years. It's $200,000 a year you got to make. Now you spread that over 25 years, we're down to like $40,000 a year or something. So
you're talking about commercial scale solar projects size,
yeah.
not like car batteries for Teslas.
Well, car batteries too. Both. They're both falling at the same time at the same price. And car batteries are bigger than commercial batteries. Car batteries are 90% of the market. In fact, car batteries are pulling power grid batteries, which is one of the reasons power grid batteries have fallen in price so much, is that they have a kind of a big sibling who's already fighting through the forest and doing the mining and driving the investment and doing a lot of technology research. So car batteries are pulling the energy storage industry like little kind of brother, tagging along, being like, oh, wow, look at all that.
I was asking about the 25-year timelines, lifetimes for batteries. Are you observing them for like a spare to solar projects in that 25-year range? Because the solar project's lifetime is about 25 years. So that's a pretty good match.
Yeah, I've seen for the very first time a 25-year warranty on a battery. And it comes from a company named Catl, C-A-T-L. They're the world's largest battery maker. And they've come out with a couple of items recently that are really just changing what we think about batteries. They came out with a 1 million mile battery warranty on a vehicle. 1 million miles. Like, you see these pictures every once in a while on the internet of somebody with an old pickup truck from 1972 who, has been driving it forever that has 1 million miles. Cars don't last 1 million miles. They fall apart. So now the batteries are lasting longer than the cars. And so that's just different. It's just we're changing our perspective on what batteries can do. Now with power plants, for the first time, we're seeing a 25-year battery. At 25 years, this document I saw said the battery would still be at 72% of its original output, state of charge. The solar panels after 25 years, they're at like 85%. So you're right, exactly right. These two things are now lining up in a way that never did before. And this is part of that technological advancement that's occurring. And it's happening now. Like, if you wanted to drop in, this would be the time to do it. If you wanted to become a developer, energy storage, and start cutting your teeth, do it now, because it's just happening right now. It's like I'm in the news every single day. It's my job, professionally and as a hobby and as I write. And the things coming across are just, they make the things that the smartest people said 5 years ago just wrong. The models from 5 years ago, wrong, useless. You put a model in front of me now with a battery that lasts 5 years and costs $400 per kilowatt hour. I got batteries that last 25 and cost $100 per kilowatt hour. That's just, it's 25% the cost, 500% the production. Different equation, different financial models, different use cases now. And that's what's occurring, is batteries are now being used differently because of this advancement.
This has indeed been a game changer, and you described it so eloquently. I was wondering if we could tie this back to LCOS discussion. And this might be the last question of this interview, just being mindful of your time. You've mentioned these new advances in battery technology. On the commercial solar side, how does this translate into your financial models? Are you calculating LCOS as well?
Yes. They're both in the equation: cost of storage and cost of batteries, or cost of storage and the cost of solar. They're both being combined, and it's challenging to combine them now because we have to develop new software tools or new spreadsheets, which are a little more complex because batteries add multiple layers of complexity. Solar is easy. It just generates and outputs. The sun is up, solar's out. But with batteries, there's equations, there's complexities, there's, how are you going to use the battery? Because a battery can be used. With solar, you plug it in, it goes. Are you going to have the electricity just fill up the battery and pour out? Or is it going to go out when the electricity price is high? Or is it going to hold and go out when the demand charge at the location is high? Or when the local power grid has an evening peak from 6 to 9 p.m. So we put in the price of all the hardware into one big bucket. We put a price of the O&M into another big bucket. We have the daytime solar generation revenue offsetting that. And then we try and figure out what the battery generation is going to be. And then we divide it all by a big equation, and we get that same ROI. We get those same equations. And people are using batteries differently now, though. And this is the last slide. This is California, their power grid, CAISO, the California Independent System Operator. And because the price of batteries is coming down and the price of evening electricity in California is so expensive, we now have, for the first time, this big teal light green section. At this point, on a Sunday, which is a low electricity use day, batteries represented 28% of the California power grid. Bigger than wind, bigger than hydro, bigger than imports, gas, nuclear, and of course solar, because it's after the sun goes down. But this is now batteries starting to take over in places which they couldn't go. They weren't cheap enough. And so now batteries are being used in solar projects to offset expensive daytime electricity. In California, we have to use them because daytime electricity is worth zero. So we come back to these batteries and we do our calculation, which essentially involves LCOS and LCOE. but it's really ROI. And this cost is falling, and it's happening now. There's a report on electricity queues, the projects that have submitted for interconnection. And right now, for the future, 50, 60, 70% of power grid in the United States is solar and solar plus storage out over the next 10 years, 5 years. And that's probably going to get bigger. And we're probably going to see sometime soon businesses disconnecting from the grid or doing something more creative, saying they only want a minimum grid connection in for a case of emergency. We're going to see big places do overnight power. We've been doing off-grid solar for decades, but now we might see, like, I don't know, a city go off-grid, or a power company no longer build an expensive power line, because instead of doing a power line, they'll just put a solar plus storage plant at the end of that power line and take care of that remote place. So the cost of solar coming down, the cost of batteries coming down right now, spread over 25 years, what LCOS and LCOE tells us, it's telling us that the future, it's going to be solar plus storage for so much that so many people thought wasn't possible 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. They were making fun of us. They're like, they'll never scale. And now there's too much solar. Now they're like, it's too cheap. It's not fair. Good. I'm okay with that. So it's changing. It's changing right now all around us. We're in the midst of it.
You were sharing the visual of the infamous duck curve, and at one point it was renamed to a canyon curve. So now the fat duck is becoming leaner again because of the batteries coming online. And I think I've mentioned this to my students that now in California, the peaker plant is no longer a natural gas plant, it's the battery. And this is incredible. And as you've shown so well on a Sunday, when demand is very different from weekday, batteries are still supplying. So appreciate that visual. John, our time is nearly up. Is there one last thing you wanted to share with the students?
I guess the largest industry on earth, well, I guess it's data now. I don't know, maybe weapons, but energy is right up there. And now we have new energy opportunities, and everybody has to figure out how they're going to work. There's a gentleman called Jagar Shah. He's very well known within the solar industry, within the energy industry. He works for the Department of Energy nowadays. He says that this renewable energy change, wind and solar and batteries and hydro and hydrogen, is going to be our generation's greatest wealth creation opportunity. And if that's your goal, is to build a good savings account, this is an industry it seems to be good for us to do, because we need it, and it also seems to be good for some people's wallets. So it's a good thing to work on. It's not just feel good, warm and fuzzy type of stuff. It pays bills.
Thank you, John. Here. I appreciate your time, and I hope that at some point you will visit us at SICE in person.
Absolutely.
When you're down from Rhode Island.
Will do. No questions asked.